Confrontation is a normal part of human interaction, but most people are never taught how to handle it properly. When tension starts to build between two individuals, the body often reacts before the situation becomes serious. The brain quickly identifies a potential threat, triggering a physical response even if the conflict is minor. This automatic response is rooted in survival instincts, and while it once served a clear purpose, it now often gets in the way of rational thought in everyday situations. These reactions are not signs of weakness or poor character. They're automatic processes shaped by evolution. The nervous system prioritizes safety and survival, not thoughtful dialogue. That's why during conflict, people often say things they don't mean or lose their ability to express themselves clearly. The pressure to respond is high, but the internal system that supports good judgment is already compromised. Afterwards, people often reflect on these moments with discomfort. They recognize that they weren't fully in control of their words or behavior. They may feel embarrassed, angry with themselves, or unsure how to repair the damage. This creates a pattern where confrontation becomes something to fear or avoid, even when it's necessary. This video examines the structure of those moments. It breaks down the biological and psychological systems involved, and how some people manage to remain steady in situations that cause others to shut down or lose control. The goal isn't to win arguments or appear unaffected, but to remain clear enough to respond without being driven by fear or anger. Miyamoto Musashi was a 17th century Japanese swordsman known for winning every duel he fought. His ability to stay composed in violent situations became central to his reputation. In 1612, he faced a rival named Sasaki Kojiro. The duel was scheduled to take place on a remote island. Kojiro arrived on time, fully prepared. He waited for Musashi, but as the hours passed, he began to lose patience. The delay wasn't an accident. Musashi had chosen to arrive late, using the time to carve a wooden sword from an oar while still in his boat. When Musashi finally stepped onto the beach, he looked completely at ease. Kojiro, in contrast, had become visibly agitated. The waiting had affected him. He was no longer thinking with the same clarity he had at the beginning of the day. When the fight began, Musashi kept his movements simple. He stayed calm and struck only once. The hit was fatal. Kojiro fell immediately. Observers later described Musashi's calm as a kind of weapon. It wasn't that Kojiro lacked skill, but that he let the situation affect his state of mind. Musashi didn't. That difference shaped the outcome before either of them moved. This kind of control isn't only relevant in swordsmanship, it's an example of how clarity under pressure creates an advantage. When a person holds their ground internally, they're less likely to be pulled into someone else's panic or aggression. That choice to remain stable often matters more than the strategy itself. He didn't just practice techniques of combat. He trained the ability to stay calm regardless of what the opponent was doing. In his writings, he urged his students to move through both fighting and daily life with the same clarity of mind. Calm wasn't just encouraged, it was required. Musashi warned against being too aggressive or too passive. Both could be exploited. His advice was to avoid showing your emotional state at all. That neutrality was part of his defense. One passage makes this especially clear. Musashi wrote that when an enemy charges forward recklessly, the right move is not to match their urgency, but to remain calm. He explained that anger and haste reduce awareness, while stillness allows you to see more clearly. If you can resist being drawn into their speed or tone, you preserve your ability to respond on your own terms. He also recognized that calmness can have an effect on the other person. When one combatant remains composed, the other often becomes uncertain. Musashi advised making a deliberate show of calm, noting that it often caused the opponent to lower their guard. This wasn't psychological trickery, it was the use of presence as a tool, the idea that your internal state can shape the interaction itself. That concept appears far beyond samurai teachings. In Hermetic philosophy, it's said that internal energy carries a kind of transmission. Emotions and thoughts aren't isolated. They influence others through a subtle form of induction. Modern science has found similar patterns through the study of mirror neurons and emotional contagion. When one person stays calm, it becomes more difficult for the group to remain agitated. Tension lowers not through argument, but through example. Musashi's point wasn't just about keeping composure for its own sake. He was describing a mechanism, how one person's state of mind changes the shape of the conflict itself. The Stoics considered emotional reactivity, especially anger, to be a form of self-abandonment. They didn't see it as strength, but as evidence that a person had surrendered their ability to choose how to respond. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote repeatedly about this. In his journal, later known as Meditations, he noted that the closer a person moves toward calmness, the closer they come to real strength. Rage, complaint, and emotional outbursts were seen not as signs of power, but of imbalance. Seneca, another Stoic, went further. He compared anger to a temporary insanity. To him, reacting blindly was a regression, a slip into something less than human. For the Stoics, self-control wasn't just restraint, it was the foundation of dignity. One of their practices was to anticipate conflict in advance. Marcus advised himself each morning that he would inevitably encounter difficult people, rude, selfish, manipulative. But instead of reacting with offense, he trained himself to see their behavior as ignorance, not evil. These people were not enemies. They were flawed humans, acting without clarity, just like he sometimes did. This mindset reframed confrontation. Instead of taking things personally, he would treat these moments as tests of his own character. He reminded himself that all people share a common nature and that his task wasn't to defeat them, but to coexist with them. This is where Stoic calm becomes something more than restraint. It's a way of interpreting the situation that neutralizes anger at its source. If the other person's hostility is seen as confusion rather than cruelty, it doesn't land in the same way. It loses its power to wound. The Stoics didn't deny that conflict could be painful or unfair. They just believed that your interpretation of it mattered more than the event itself. A calm mind, in this sense, isn't passive. It's an active choice to resist being shaped by someone else's disorder and to turn that moment into a chance to practice stability instead of hostility. Esoteric traditions add a deeper layer to the idea of remaining calm in conflict. Hermeticism, a system of ancient wisdom, teaches that the outer world mirrors the inner. Change the inner and the outer may follow. In confrontation, this means that if we shift our internal response, turning panic into presence or irritation into understanding, the entire dynamic can begin to shift with it. The Hermetic path speaks of mental alchemy, transforming base emotional reactions into something elevated, like turning lead into gold, fear into alertness, or anger into clear, focused resolve. The Kybalion, a Hermetic text from the early 20th century, describes emotions as vibrations. Low vibrations correspond to reactive, chaotic states, higher ones to clarity and calm. The teaching is simple but demanding. Raise your vibration through will. Don't wait for your mood to shift. Command it. Modern psychology has analogues to this. Adrenaline, for instance, is often experienced as panic, but it can just as easily become energy or focus, depending on how the mind frames it. The feeling is the same, only the interpretation changes. That interpretation is within our control. Gnostic traditions echo this. They see much of what we call reality as a projection, an illusion shaped by ignorance. The true battle, they say, is not with others, but with the pull of delusion and imbalance. To gain gnosis, inner knowledge, is to see through the provocations of the world and remain anchored in something more stable. This view also appears across religious traditions. In Christianity, the instruction to turn the other cheek isn't about weakness, it's about breaking the cycle of retaliation. In Sufi mysticism, humility is praised not as self-debasement, but as proof of inner security. One saying puts it clearly, "Lower your wings to the humble." Another, from the poet Rumi, offers a sharper image. Raise your words, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder. Across these teachings, the message is the same. Real power in confrontation doesn't come from force, volume, or domination, but from clarity, restraint, and the ability to remain undisturbed when everything else is shaking. Layer by layer, esoteric insight, spiritual teaching, philosophy, and psychology all point to a set of common principles behind staying calm in chaos: knowledge of self, management of one's own emotions, empathy for the other, and a wider perspective beyond the immediate clash. These principles are not about suppressing emotion, which only causes it to explode later, but about transmuting and channeling it. The warrior monk Musashi and the Stoic emperor Aurelius would nod in agreement on this. Calm is not weakness, but a form of terrifying power. It's the power of presence, being fully in control of your own center, which unsettles those who aren't. It's the power of clarity, seeing what is really happening without being blinded by red mist or white fear. And it's the power of choice, the ability to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. The simplest most universal tool to regain calm is your breath. Nearly every tradition highlights this. In Japanese Zen, which Musashi studied in the monastery, samurai were taught to synchronize breath with movement. Musashi wrote of striking in time with your breathing. When a confrontation triggers your adrenaline, consciously take a slow, deep breath. This sends a biochemical signal of safety to your nervous system, helping to steady the racing heart and shaking hands. Feel your feet on the ground or the sensation of your hands. This grounds you in your body, pulling you out of the whirlpool of anxious thoughts. Elite soldiers and meditators alike use breathing techniques to find focus in chaos. Even a single deep breath, inhaling count 4, exhaling count 6, can create a tiny space in which your mind can collect itself before responding. To stay calm in any confrontation is ultimately an act of self-transformation. It is a kind of alchemy of the soul, turning the lead of reactive emotion into the gold of enlightened response. It draws on a holistic understanding of conflict, the insight that battles are won or lost primarily within, and that by aligning ourselves with enduring principles, call it Tao, Dharma, Stoic virtue, or the will of God, we become instruments of a higher order even in chaos. Calmness in chaos is not a talent one is born with. It is a way of being one cultivates. The figure of Musashi stands as an enduring symbol of this cultivation, a man who fused the practical and the spiritual, honing his sword technique alongside his Zen mind, such that in the fury of combat, he remained as still as a mountain lake. We too, in our less lethal, but no less stressful modern duels, can aspire to that state of power through stillness. In closing, remember that each confrontation, however painful or difficult, is in fact a teacher. Every clash is a mirror showing us where our own fears and attachments lie. By approaching conflicts with the eyes of a philosopher warrior, we transform their very nature. A shouting match becomes a chance to practice empathy and eloquence. A threat becomes a catalyst for courage and clever strategy. An inner crisis becomes a breakthrough to deeper self-knowledge. This doesn't happen overnight, but with dedication, the moments that used to trigger us can start to trigger our training instead. The modern world, rife with division and strife, actually offers countless chances to practice these teachings, from social media arguments to workplace disagreements. Seen in this light, confrontation is not something to dread, it is something to work with consciously. May we each walk that path of self-transformation, turning confrontations into opportunities to demonstrate the better angels of our nature. In doing so, we don't just calm the confrontation, we elevate it, perhaps even healing it. As all these layers of wisdom suggest, when we cultivate calmness and insight in the face of conflict, we become alchemists of our own life, forging strength from strife and finding peace in the very heart of the storm.